If a father nominated a Mohel or a Sandik, initially he's not able to change to give it to somebody else, but nevertheless, if he did change, Taz says since it's only a verbal nomination, it's not binding, and therefore the second would become now the Sandik, or the second would become a Mohel. This comes from the Tshuvas Karosh, who says that it's a verbal declaration. However, Shach understands this concept of the Rosh differently than the Taz. Shach understands it that the Bezdin is not able to enforce the father to keep his word. And even though the Bezdin, the Jewish court, is not able to enforce the father's initial nomination, nevertheless, Rosh agrees with Maharam that the father transgresses the concept that a Jew is not allowed to do anything wrong, and the Jew is not allowed to lie. And Rosh would agree with Maharam that it's permissible to call such a father a sinner, an evil person, for changing his initial nomination. However, Maharam says that the initial verbal designation is binding, because that's the custom, that is the minhag, to appoint somebody verbally. Nevertheless, Rosh disagrees with that, says it's a verbal declaration, it's not binding, but nevertheless agrees that one is allowed to call the father a sinner for changing his nomination. However, in the case that the father found a different Mohel later on, who is a bigger specialist or who is more righteous, we understand that if a father would have got a choice initially to appoint the first or the second, he would have appointed the second because he's more righteous or he's more professional. We say that he's able to nullify his initial nomination, he's not called a sinner, and he's not transgressing the prohibition of doing wrong and of not lying. A question was asked to Chasam Sofer by the father who nominated the Mohel and shook hands with the Mohel. Why did he shake hands with the Mohel? Because the Mohel was concerned that the father would nominate his friend to be a Mohel. The father designated that friend to be a Sandik. And the Mohel was concerned that he'll change the designation, make the Sandik into a Mohel, and therefore the designated Mohel shook hands with the father that he would be the Mohel. When the Mohel came to circumcision, he saw that the father was not trustworthy. He retracted, designated the Sandik to the Mohel, and one of the rabbis who was there said, you know what, we can nullify the handshake, let's get 3 people, nullify the handshake, and let the beloved friend be the Mohel. However, Chasam Sofer said that's a mistake. This that the Taz says that the father is able to change his designation and get the second Mohel who is much better than the first or is more righteous, that's in the case that the second Mohel was not there when the father made the initial designation. But here, that the father appointed him to be a Sandik, he thought of him, but later on changed his mind to make him into a Mohel, that's not the same case as the Taz. The father thought of him, but nevertheless appointed somebody else to be the Mohel, and therefore he's not able to change on his nomination. And also, it's not just a matter of verbal designation, it's a matter of payment. He made up with the Mohel that he'll pay him. And also, a handshake is more binding than a shvuah. It's more binding than an oath. And therefore, we can't just easily nullify the handshake, according to many Rishonim. Also, if the father would have told the Mohel a few days in advance that he shouldn't come, and the Mohel would agree, that's one thing. But here, it's a public embarrassment. Now he's here as a Mohel, and he's not doing circumcision. It's a public embarrassment. And Taz did not speak about such a case, and says Chasam Sofer that whoever wanted to nullify the handshake said that only of the haughtiness of his heart. Says Chasam Sofer, the first Mohel is the one that has to do the circumcision. Also, if we look at a different case, let's say a father has no money to pay the Mohel, and the Mohel says no, he's not going to do circumcision unless the father pays. So then the Bezdin has to scream at that Mohel that that's not the way of children of Abraham. The children of Abraham do chesed. They do acts of goodness and kindness. It's not the way not to do circumcision if the father cannot pay. But let's say there is no other Mohel, and the father is really not able to pay, and the Mohel refuses to circumcise, even though the Bezdin tells him he has to circumcise. So it becomes the obligation of Bezdin, becomes the obligation of a Jewish court, that the child should have circumcision. And the Mohel says, no, he's not doing circumcision unless he gets paid. So Bezdin is able to tell him, yeah, we'll pay whatever you would like to get paid. After circumcision, they have the right not to pay him. Why? If really they could not force him to do it for free, and there was not enough time to find a different Mohel to do circumcision, then we'll say it's a case of a mitzvah. Then just like in the case of a grandfather who tells his son-in-law to learn with his grandson, meaning the son-in-law's son, and he says, if you learn with your son, my grandson, I'll pay you money for it. So we say, even though the grandfather could have found somebody else, could have found a different rabbi to learn with his grandson, and that's why the father thought that really he'll pay him. Nevertheless, since it's a case of a mitzvah, the grandfather does not have to pay his son-in-law, because the son-in-law anyways was obligated to teach his son. The same here, in the case of a mitzvah that could not have been done by somebody else, there was no time to find anybody else, the Bezdin was not able to force the Mohel, they would not be obligated, in the case of a mitzvah, to pay him.